Okay, Learning Connections has been helping children and parents since 1976. We have programs, we have a range of programs for children with learning difficulties, attention disorders, behavioural problems, and we have specialist programs for the early years, for kindergartens and childcare centres. Our programs deal with a range of difficulties that many of our children present with, like attention disorders, developmental delays, speech problems, children on the spectrum. So professional development for educators is a very important part of our role, because we're aware that when you see children individually, for every child you see individually, there's probably another half a dozen sitting in their class that could benefit from these sorts of approaches. They may not have a label, or do they need a label, but they have some little differences in the way their development is progressing. So our work is supported by ongoing research project with the Australian Catholic University. So today, we're basically dealing with two topics. I'm going to talk now about the importance of the vestibular system and body awareness activities in the development of the preschool child. And Julie, when I finish, Julie will speak on implementing these activities in Early Childhood Centre. She has been able to train many of her staff and has implemented many of these activities with significant effect in many of her childcare centres. So I'd like to start off with the pyramid of learning. Now, the bottom of this triangle, we see the central nervous system and primitive reflexes. In the keynote presentation this morning, Karen gave us a lot of information about the brain and the neurons, and how anxiety has an impact on the brain, and of course can create anxiety, as can retained primitive reflexes. Now, we would love to have time to discuss more fully primitive reflexes, but today what we are going to talk about is primarily the tactile body awareness system and the vestibular system. So we'll bring those, I'll talk more about those, because they are activities that are so easily implemented in an early childhood setting. So when we look at the bottom of this pyramid, we see the central nervous system and primitive reflexes. We know, for example, when we do a lot of vestibular work, we will impact a primitive reflex that has been retained and it's past its use by date. It was there for a purpose, but it needs to be controlled and so that it doesn't interfere with the other aspects of this pyramid. So what we see is all sorts of different skills that children must develop prior to them being ready for academic learning. So we're looking at awareness of the two sides of the body, motor planning, body scheme, ocular motor controls, eye-hand coordination, language skills, behaviours, academic learning. So often a child, a parent will contact us and they say, it's just my child's speech, it's just my child's behaviour that's a problem. What we've got to see that for most children, until these bottom levels of the pyramid are in place, the behaviour will not be as it should be, and academic learning will be impacted. So today we're going to focus on the tactile and vestibular system. In our trainings that we regularly do, we look at all these areas, but today, because of shortage of time, we can only look at two of them. And Julie will show you how it's very simple to implement some of the activities that I'm talking about. So there can be many factors contributing to a child's difficulties. In our 40 years of experience, regardless of the child's diagnosis, the following factors are almost always contributing to the difficulty. Uncontrolled primitive reflexes, sensory processing immaturities, visual and auditory immaturities, and dietary factors. But today, as I said, we're focusing just on the body awareness and the vestibular activities. If there are issues with a child's behaviour and their attention, learning won't happen. So we often see the behaviour, it's just the behaviour that's a problem, but the behaviour will impact upon the learning. And so whilst the program has the most impact on children with developmental immaturities, learning and behaviour issues, educators tell us that, and our research suggests, that the program benefits most children. So in summary, lack of opportunities for movement, particularly in the first year of life, and most particularly tummy time, and Karen highlighted that today in her talk about the neurons, about how the first year of life was so important in developing those connections, is absolutely vital. And inability and lack of opportunity to move in the first year of life predisposes a child to developmental and learning and behavioural difficulties. Children need to get moving in the first 6 months of life. They are given a push-off reflex to get moving on their tummy, and this is where they learn about themselves, where they learn about space, as they move and use two sides of the body together and talk, as Karen did this morning, about two sides of the brain and working together and midline issues. The foundations for those skills are laid down in the first year of life as the child moves through space. A child goes nowhere, learns nothing when it's in a container. So let's get to the two areas that we're going to focus on, vestibular activities. Okay, what is a vestibular activity? It's actually any activity that involves positional change of the head and spinning, rolling, swinging, tumbling, repetitive jumping, trampolines, monkey bars are common vestibular activities, and children generally seek these movements out. They love to do these activities generally. So any movement that, for example, involves positional change of the head, for example, with your heads lower than the rest of your body, you could be lying on a lounge and put your head over the side of the lounge chair onto the floor. That's a positional change of the head, which creates a vestibular effect. And the vestibular effect, in actual fact, connects the ears, the eyes, and the brain. So it's part of a loop. The vestibular system is part of the loop between the ears and the eyes and the brain. So it's a very, very powerful stimulus to the brain and helps coordinate information from all the sensory systems. So our vestibular system actually functions like a traffic cop. It tells each sensation that comes into the brain where it should go and when it should stop. And it has a particular role in sorting out information from eyes and ears. And this helps us improve our concentration, attention, and impulsivity, and also has a major impact on the language centres in the brain. So, signs of vestibular problems: poor stress tolerance, frustrations, emotional regulation and behavioural issues. This is an interesting one, which many of you have probably come across in your centres. When trying to help a child balance on a narrow surface, they feel really heavy, like a sack of potatoes. This is something to do when we go back to our centres next week and we're lying on your tummy. Children cannot easily hold up head, arms and legs at the same time, which means they're more at risk for having a vestibular issue. Our clumsy children with poor ball skills, those children who are not good at sport, they stumble and fall more frequently than their peers, are likely to have a vestibular problem. Lack of hand dominance and children who are considered to be ambidextrous is often signs of a vestibular problem. Healthy, intelligent children who have trouble learning to read, write and do maths often have a vestibular problem also, as do those with left and right confusion and letter reversals. So there's two types of behaviours often around the vestibular system. We can have avoidant behaviours. There's a small group of children who may well avoid the spinning, rolling type of activities. And so we've got to be really mindful of those children and just watch them. It doesn't mean they don't need it, but it means that for some reason that it doesn't make them feel good. And so they will often be fearful of playground equipment, movement activities and elevators, and they're more likely to appear uncoordinated. And they often get very stubborn in their behaviour, they just like being upside down. And they're children who have to continue to hold on tightly to rails on stairs. So they're the avoidance behaviours. So the vestibular seeking behaviours are more common, and this you often see in those children who just can't sit still. They need to be in constant motion. They run everywhere. They're impulsive. They take unsafe risks and climb on things and jump off roofs. And they love being upside down and particularly hanging off the side of a chair. So one of the places we see a lot of seeking behaviours is, of course, is on the mat when we do mat time with young children. And so we see those children who rock and roll. And so we know that they can't move. And I think sometimes the expectation of sitting children on a mat, young children on a mat, and expecting them to listen to a story is unrealistic, because don't have good control over their bodies, and they just actually can't sit still. So we can put the bigger fidgeters to the outside of the mat. However, we always say to teachers, look, let the children lie on their tummies on the mat. They'll be much more grounded when they're on the mat, and they will listen more carefully. So when you go back to your centres, put those children on their tummies on the mat while they're listening to a story, and I'm sure that they will have more ability to control themselves. The other thing that is a very new phenomenon in the last few years is that so many children are falling off chairs. And I don't mean, they're being pushed off, but we hear from preschool, we hear from prep and year one teachers about the number of children who are sitting on their chair and they just fall on the floor. And they're falling on the floor. So this is often a sign of a need for vestibular work. And it's also often a sign of a retained primitive reflex, which unfortunately we can't talk about today. But what those children are telling you is, I need to move. So, for example, before mat time, you might have the children doing, for example, just jumping up and down in place before they lie on their tummies. If you're in the preschool setting, you might just get the child to stand behind their chairs and just swing their bodies, stay feet in place, just swing their bodies from side to side. So we're getting some vestibular movement, which is squishing that fluid around in the inner ear, which is connecting the eyes and the ears with the part of the brain that's controlling some of the movement. So these vestibular activities can be useful in all sorts of settings. So if you would like any of these charts, please feel free to let us know. We can send them to you, because they can be, you can have them in your centres. So the big thing about vestibular activities is that Karen this morning talked about anxiety. And it's our experience that using vestibular activities regularly throughout the day can have a very, very calming effect on that anxious child. And so often, if we take those children aside and show them some activities they can do, they can maybe use them themselves so that the anxiety doesn't overtake them. So we find we've had very good success with using those activities with anxious children, and they might need them very regularly throughout the day. When we, back to body awareness, so before we move on to body awareness, does anyone want to ask a question about vestibular? Would anyone like to ask a question about vestibular activities? See, the less movement we do, the less vestibular stimulus we get. The more sedentary we become, the less vestibular activity that we get. And so today's many children, you know, they're being driven long distances, or not often long distances, but often short distances, and a lot of traffic, which actually takes a long time. So they're sitting, they get out of bed, they you know, sit in the car, sit at the table, have some breakfast. Hopefully they've had breakfast, get driven to school, sit at a desk, and we wonder why they can't sit still. And very often it's this lack of opportunity to move and the vestibular stimulus that comes from moving. So moving on to body awareness. At birth, the baby doesn't even know it's got a body. It doesn't know where it begins or ends. So it will learn that it's got a body through moving. And nature has equipped us with the goods to get moving. For example, when we're lying on our tummy on the floor, our fidgety movements, if everyone has seen the fidgety movements, uncontrolled movements that a newborn has, its toe and those fidgety movements will at some stage hit the floor, and that will cause an automatic straightening of the leg, which helps propel the child forward. It can't use two sides of the body yet because it doesn't even know it's got a body. But this reflexive movement actually propels the child forward so that eventually it is going to be able to use right and left arm to move forward, right and left leg to push forward. And so the more opportunities for this tummy time, the better the child's development is going to be, because it is through this tummy movement that body awareness will develop. And then you're not going to need to roll on the floor when you get to prep. So there are significant barriers to early movement in our modern environment. And so many children are spending so much time in those types of containers. And the one that just really puts fear into my heart is the one there of that little baby in the sleep suit without arms. Because we need to know and learn about our bodies through movement, how's the child that's spending all its sleep time without arms, which, and of course, I think those suits are designed so that the startle reflex isn't activated. But that child's going to not even know it's got arms. It's going to have difficulty moving forward. That's going to impact on its visual development. For example, we know that stretching out and putting right arm forward and left arm forward to move along actually is a kick into our vestibular system, and it's very much a kick into the visual system, which helps the child focus. So it's not just about seeing, it's about learning how to focus two eyes and on a point. And so we know that many children don't develop those early focusing skills that they need to have to learn more about their environment, because they're not stretching out and moving. And so you look at a baby whose tummy crawling all around the floor, and it's touching and feeling everything in its path, puts things in its mouth, because we know up until about 15 months, the baby's sense of touch and its mouth will tell its brain more about its world than its eyes do. So the baby's sense of touch and its body awareness is helping its eyes to see. So that's pretty amazing, isn't it? Like, it's 15 months before the child's visual system begins to take over as a moving sense. And most of us have taken little kids to the supermarket when they were very little and popped them in the trolley, and we move along the shelves, and our babies are touching and trying to touch all the cans on the shelf. And then one day they stop because they don't need to touch it anymore. One look at it tells them what it is. So many of these containers that so many of our children are spending far too much time in are impacting significantly on their development. Because if we don't know where the parts of our body are at any time, we can't make postural adjustments. And so we're going to fall over, and we are going to be the clumsy kid, and we are going to be the kid that can't hit the soccer ball, and no one's going to want us in their team. And as well as this, where our body parts are, just as importantly is also the movement that creates an internal sense of our physical self. and enables us to move without conscious awareness. I mean, we don't have to think about how we move, but many of our children with this poor input from their bodies actually do have to think about how they move, how a movement should occur. So this is the connection between body awareness and our vestibular system. Input from our bodies is primarily processed through the vestibular system. This input also coordinates information from all the other sensory systems, acting like the traffic cop, telling each sensation where to go, when it should stop. And so therefore it influences our body movements and coordination. So as Karen said this morning, we grow our brain through experience. And so if we're not getting this experience on our tummies around the floor where we're touching and feeling and smelling and tasting everything in our path and rolling around the floor, getting some vestibular stimulus, we're going to have probably some lags in our development. So young children, when we look at young children play, they're generally seeking out activities that do stimulate their vestibular system. They're rolling down hills and screaming and yelling and happy, and because swings and these things make them feel good. Vestibular stimulus makes us feel good. Those of us who exercise, for example, we go for a walk in the park and we might perhaps have a bit of a run. And so there's a sensory aspect to that. But one of the things that also is an impact of that is the stimulus we've given to our vestibular system actually from moving. So even as adults, we're getting some of the stimulus to our vestibular system that makes us feel good. And that's often what children are seeking out. We see them falling off the chair as a behaviour, but actually it's often a sensory need that they're trying to meet. It's not being met in other ways. So educators are telling us, as I mentioned, that large numbers of children in rooms are frequently falling off the chairs and rolling around on the floor. So what do when we see that happen? We get everybody up and we perhaps get them doing some star jumps. We maybe just get them holding onto the back of the chair and swinging from side to side. And as I mentioned earlier, sitting still at mat time can be particularly difficult for children with poor body awareness. So not only is it a vestibular need to move when we're on their mat, but it's actually a need to get input from our bodies. So you really find it you can't really just make a distinction between vestibular stimulus and body awareness, because most times when you stimulate one, you stimulate the other. So through body awareness, we learn to understand where our body is and how to move it. This helps us develop the spatial skills and concepts which are necessary for mathematics, helps us internalise right and left, helps us with directionality, where we start on the page, which way the B and the D go, and which way to move and use scissors, and helps us with awareness of our fingers and thumb and hand, which we're going to need to read and write, to hold our pencil and read and write. So we find that many children who have difficulty with number concept and with early maths concepts, they've often got a significant issue with body awareness. And so we know that also directionality and reversals, for example, once a child has been shown the correct letter formation, after about 6 to 8 months, 9 months of practice, they should know which way the B and D goes, and reversal should not continue into years 2 and 3. We know that those children will have probably some spatial difficulties, maybe some left-right problems, some midline problems, some vestibular issues. So we know that these things are often indicators of underlying immaturities. Okay, these are some body awareness activities, and as I said earlier, if you'd like some of these charts, you can contact us and we send them on to you. But there's lots of things you can do very simply in your day, connecting upper and lower body and upper body, and lots of things for the playground as well. So please feel free to contact us if you like these charts. Now, we can also, this is a lovely way of combining body awareness and vestibular movement. So what little Luke here is doing, he's an 8-year-old boy, and he's doing a lovely log roll. And he's wrapped up in a blanket. So it's actually over his head. So he's got to be aware of his body when he's in that rug, and then he's going to roll back. So he's got to rely on input from his body, from his muscles and ligaments and joints, to tell him where his body is as he rolls, because unfortunately technology doesn't let him go the whole way back, but he does go the whole way back. He's relying on his input from muscles and ligaments and joints that tell him to tell his brain what his body's doing. So he's getting the touch stimulus from being in contact with the floor. He's getting wonderful vestibular stimulus, and he's activating that loop between the ear, the eye, and the brain as he rolls both ways. And it's always really important to roll in both directions, because you stimulate different receptors in your inner ear depending on which direction you roll. And you stimulate different receptors when your head's in a different body plane. For example, you stimulate different receptors when your head's upright, when you spin around, than you do when your head's down and you spin around. So that's an important thing to do. So give children lots of different opportunities to roll in different positions, and that's a very simple thing to do with young children. When you've got outdoor play time for children, we have a period, particularly if they've got a hill. Hill's a wonderful thing for children to roll down. Always make sure that they go in both directions. Very important. Now, this is one of the things I think we need to do very much is look at our children more carefully before we tell parents that they're really ready for school. We often hear from early childhood educators, Johnny's really ready for school because he's so bored. He's so bored with the activities. Very often, it isn't actually boredom. I mean, if we're a good educator and we've got differences we're putting out interesting programs, very often this so-called boredom is actually maybe the first sign that the child has an attention problem. So they're not so much bored as that it's very difficult for them to persist and keep concentrating in an area. So it's not necessarily boredom. And we see and hear all the time about parents being given information that their children's really bright, and so they're really ready to go to school because they'll just be bored if they stay here. But being bright doesn't necessarily mean being school ready. And this is a classic case of a child that we saw this year. He was an older child going to school, so he wasn't just 5. He was a good 5-year-old. His birthday, I think, was July or August. So he was certainly older, and he was told by his kindy teacher that he was ready for school. He was articulate, he was bright, but he lacked interest in paper and pencil activities, and he was brought to us because it was so difficult for him to write and draw, and he really had never had any interest in writing and drawing. And so by the time it came to March and everyone else was writing their name and he still couldn't write his name, so that was one of the reasons the mother brought him. It was the main reason really, but he also, she didn't quite see that his poor self-regulation was a problem. And very much that he couldn't skip. He couldn't skip alternate legs. He also had extreme difficulty balancing on right leg and also on left leg. And when we looked at him, he also had difficulty crossing the midline. However, look at these blocks. His name was Alex. He got these sensory blocks that we have, and he actually wrote his name in blocks. So he was feeling a failure in his prep year because he couldn't write his name, and yet he could spell out his name in blocks. And so we've got to look at not just this bright, this articulate, this being bored, as being perhaps this means the child needs to move on to other things. We need to look more broadly. We need to look at behaviours. We need to look at, can they march? Can they skip or alternate feet? Can they throw and catch a ball? Can they balance on right leg? Can they balance on left leg? Because if those things are not in place, for example, if a child can't skip alternate feet, it's actually not ready to read. It's not ready to read. So this was a bright child. For example, that's really clever. He just got those blocks out, and he knew that he couldn't write his name, and he wanted to show us that he knew what his name was. Okay, one of the previous presenters today talked about technology, the OT that has just done a session, and we'd like to mention it because I think it is having a huge impact on our children, having a huge impact on all of us. And while some programs have real merit, it's important to understand that the time that we spend on technology, the time that young children spend on technology, is time that is not spent and forever lost on the play activities that develop their school readiness. And that's a big problem. So it's all about getting the balance right. It's about not having technology, but it's about balance of it. It's about equating screen time with green time. For example, if you have 20 minutes on your screen, you've got to have 20 minutes playing with green time. So it's about balance. So what do we do instead of our technology with young children? Well, one of the things we can do is, okay, you don't have technology through the week, but maybe you listen to an audio book without pictures. So you help to develop the visualizations that children will need to be good readers and learners. So one of the things about technology and screens is that it takes away vital opportunities for a child to visualize. The screen provides the picture. We want the child's brain to be making a picture, because the child has difficulty with visualization. It's going to be the child who has problems with comprehension. They may read like a newsreader on the ABC, but have no idea what the story is about. Difficulty with comprehension. And so they're children who are going to often have difficulty retelling stories. Because what did you do at kindy today? What did you do at preschool today? Well, you don't expect them to be telling you great stories, but you do expect them to be able to tell you something that has happened. And so one of the things that's really impacting significantly on our preschool children today is this exposure to screens at the expense of movement and at the expense of books and auditory stimulus. And auditory enriched environments include singing and nursery rhymes. And we had a previous presenter talking about, I think actually might have been Karen, who talked about, facial expressions and things. One of the great ways that we can get children we know in the preschool area cleaning up is singing a song, and they love it, and they sing the song and they clean up and everything goes perfectly. So we've got to get children giving children more opportunities to sing, more opportunities to learn nursery rhymes, because it's our experience that many children, the parents will say, oh yes, they know the nursery rhymes, but when we get them to perhaps repeat them, they maybe know the first line. With a bit of luck, they might know the second one, but they certainly don't know the whole nursery rhyme. So what does that tell us about that child that's going through to school that has the ability to maybe only say the first or the second line of a popular nursery rhyme? What does that tell us about them? It tells us, number one, they've got a problem with sequence. So they're probably going to have a trouble listening in the classroom. But most importantly, that they're not visualising, because we should remember, for example, that Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall. What happened next? So they're not visualising either, because they might know the words, but if they were really visualising, they'd remember that actually Humpty fell off the wall. So we are actually not helping our children with this exposure to screens, because we are very much limiting the auditory exposure they have. And this is compounded by the significant use of white noise apps for sleeping in babies. And this white noise is at a frequency which a low frequency sound, which is it helps, well, it creates the child's brain to attenuate to just hearing that frequency. The language frequencies are in the higher languages in the high frequencies, and so in 2019, through Spotify, the white noise app was the most frequently downloaded one. 2019. So I think in a few years' time we're going to have children entering school with much more difficulty with auditory skills, and particularly with language, because it's not. The children are not going to listen to language because they're so used to hearing that white noise, which is a pretty awful sound if you listen to it as an adult. And we have often children being exposed. We know children in 2 and 3, and they have it in the day as well. So a large part of their day is actually they're being exposed to this, what I think is horrible noise. But it's we can get the same effect if we perhaps put on some high frequency music, for example, using Mozart CDs for babies can help give you some of the effect from a constant low noise background, but with the frequencies that are involved in language, not that low frequency stuff. It's not. So this is also important from the development of speech as well. So the house where television is on for 2 hours a day, or screens for the same amount of time, the occupants of that house will speak 6,000 words combined to each other in one day. In a house where screens were on whenever anyone was home, the occupants of that house would speak 500 words combined. So excess exposure to screens is certainly impacting upon the amount of language that children are being exposed to. So Julie's going to show you some of the things she's doing in her centres, play and learn centres, where they've introduced a lot of the activities that we recommend to promote development. So before I hand over to her, I just want to say to you all that when you're doing these activities, if you start implementing some of the things that Julie is doing, that you do them regularly. It's regularity and consistency of doing something that confers the most benefit. And we know that, for example, if you want to get fit, you don't go to the gym or go for a walk once a week. You've got to do it more often. And so feedback from educators using our program with their classes has consistently shown that nearly all children, not just those in trouble, are helped by our programs. So today you're going to be given activities that are easily implemented and can benefit all children. So we learn by doing. We don't learn by sitting in a container or sitting in front of a screen. So our brains are wired through hands-on interaction with the physical world. Okay. Any questions before we move on to Julie?
We can't see the chat box, Christine. Is there anything in there that needs answering?
No, you just had comments like, we agree, it has been wonderful, extremely interesting. So yes, no,
okay, lovely.
Thank you very much. Yes, that's a good explanation of body awareness and vestibular. So we're ready to see the next part.
Lovely.
Okay,
thanks Christine.
You'll go, Julie. It's all up to you now.
Thanks, Maureen. She never ceases to amaze me, and I get mesmerised by her. I don't know how to flick a screen. So is this one of these moments where I go ting and it'll move on to my presentation? Are you going to do it, Diane?
Yep, I think Diane will be on it.
She'll be on it. There you go. All right. This part of the presentation never ceases to amaze me. Maureen asked me to do it, but it's not going to be revolutionary at all. I met Maureen at the Early Childhood, the ECTA conference many years ago, and was absolutely fascinated by that session. And I've, in our Play and Learn centres now, we've probably put about 90 staff through the program. So we're all kind of on the same page and we're all doing the same thing. But, you know, for what it's worth, here's what we do in our centres. And I understand that some people today will have infants in their services and some will be just traditionally, you know, kindergarten and preschoolers. But what are we doing with Maureen's program, Diane's program, is that I just remember that we need to move, and we need to move throughout the day, and we need to do that through play. So in that photo there, that's exactly what I'm doing. We're playing 5 grey elephants balancing on a piece of string. And so, you know, I'm really looking at children being able to, you know, cross over on that piece of rope, and I use it as a transition activity to the bathroom. You can also see there that there's no interactive screens either, although some of our centres do have an interactive whiteboard, but it's used sparingly. We use the program intentionally and also spontaneously. And there is little Ashton on his scooter board that the kids you know, have access to all the time. And most of our movement activities, the children have access to all the time. It's certainly been an interesting journey, and we've really reflected over the time how we set up services. I am very fortunate that I am able to have a creative side in building services. And I've certainly looked, after meeting Maureen and Diane, I have actually looked at building services differently than we ever did in the past. And I'll share some of that with you in a minute. But I understand the constraints that, you know, people already have playgrounds that are already set, and they don't have the ability to be able to pop things in like I do. I also understand that in an early learning centre or a kindergarten, we don't have those open spaces that we do in perhaps the school playground, where they have a much bigger area to play ball. And, you know, generally an early childhood surface is you know, 7.2 square metres for every child, and that's what we've got. So we do have constraints, and we need to, early childhood rooms are filled with furniture, and so we don't have those open spaces where we're doing that, you know, have those spaces for rolling. But there's ways and means we can do it, you know, without having that. And there's a perfect example of me doing 5 grey elephants with the kids, and obviously the rest of the group is already in the bathroom. All right, Diane. The other thing that I really do, knowing that children need to move, is I also intentionally lead them into play that has them doing things like crawling. Now this is Ollie and Ashton, and I had taken out some boxes, and we were going, you know, my plan for the day was, you know, we were going to make some buildings with these boxes, but the children led me on a totally different trajectory, as they often do, and this was their water slide. And so the box sort of collapsed, and then we put boxes in front. And then I went and got the little pipe that belonged to something else, and that was Ashton. And he's putting the water down the water slide as Ollie and Stella go down. And so then I intentionally stood at the bottom and said, you know, my feet are getting wet from the water. When I've seen the water slide, you know, at Dream World, it goes down into a drain. And so this was the drain that I made out of the nappy boxes from the nappies being delivered. And children deliberately had to crawl through that. And so here we go. We're now, you know, we've got that crawling motion going on, and it happens really without the children even knowing that I'm saying, okay, well, now we need to be doing some crawling. but it's very deliberate of me. I do it, I manipulate, you know, my husband would tell you I do the same as well, but I do manipulate children into, you know, doing those activities where they're using their big body muscles all the time. So, ting, Diane. The other thing that we've really looked at a play and learn centre is definitely having no containers, and certainly in the baby's room, there are no rockers, there are no cradles, there are no bumper seats, there is nothing. And I can always tell that we're a little different when I get a new staff member that goes into a baby's room and says, can I please have a chat with you? And I'll say, yes, and I know what's coming, and they'll say, I'm just wondering whether you would be able to get me a rocker for this room. And I say, yes, I could do that, but before we do that, can you do me a favour? Can I send you to some PD for 2 days? You need to, you know, you need 2 days, you know, I'll replace you, I'll pay for it, and can you just go, and then if you want that rocker when you come back, we'll talk about it further. And then I send them off to Maureen and Diane, and no one ever comes back asking for a rocker because they totally get it. But if I say the same thing, it's a little different. So no one has a rocker or a cradle or anything in an infant's room. The other thing that I have done too, which is this whole, and I understand that, you know, when you can't change your service, but the other thing that I have done deliberately is I have polished concrete the floors. So you can see the little man at the bottom, and they're my floors. So they're really great to crawl on. They're really lovely surfaces to, you know, do all that crawling, and they're interesting surfaces. And that's been a really successful. And then we have soft furnishings like mats and carpets and things like that. But it is a nice surface when you want to do crawling. So just go and tell the boss that you need to rip up all the carpet and flooring in the service and polish the concrete. No, don't. And we have lots of tummy time. So lots of tummy time. No one goes in a bilbo or anything like a baby bounce or anything like that. So that's a very deliberate strategy at our services. Ding.
Can I just say, that child's beautiful. He's very comfortable on his tummy. His head's way up, his back is strong. You will see not too many children of this age, and today they won't be as up and they won't be as erect as he is. You can see he's had good tummy time.
If my educators say to me they don't like tummy time, I say they're the children that need even more tummy time. You know, the children who don't like to be on their tummies are the ones that need to be there even more. So, yeah. The other thing that I have enjoyed doing is absolutely messing with my playground man's head, because he has spent years ripping monkey bars out, and I come along and I say, I would like a set of monkey bars. And so that's been a real challenge. There's been a real challenge between risk and what is that upper body strengthening that children need to have for writing and for sitting at school. And so we are now putting monkey bars back in. Does the Department of Education like me? Probably not. And I understand that for some educators, they just wouldn't be able to cope with, our monkey bars are our favourite. Good, someone else has monkey bars. They are a bit of a risk, and educators get a little bit stressed by it. But children very quickly learn how to use them, and if they're fearful, they will regulate themselves anyway. You can see that one of our strategies is the little stool. So the little stool is, the monkey bars are open, and if the step isn't there, that means that the children just know that the monkey bars are shut for the moment, because there's not an educator there. So I don't know whether, Diane, you can get that to play. Is it going to play with Stevie crossing the monkey bars? No, it's not. So that should have been it's saying unavailable. That's Stevie there. And we were going to play a little video. She is a machine, as generally my preps are by the time they leave us on that monkey bar. She goes down to the end. She turns around swinging by one hand, and she motors on back. ding, and you can go to Cecily on. Now this is a TP that we have in one of the services, and I'm hoping that this media plays. Does it die? Does it? Oh, okay. So here Cecily is doing a somersault, and I stood there and I said to her, is it okay that Miss Julie videotapes you? And I had a new educator in this service that hadn't met me, and she came flying over and she said to Cecily, should you be doing that? And I said to her, hi, my name's Miss Julie. Is there a reason why she shouldn't be doing it? And she said, it looks a little dangerous. And I said, nah, she's fine. And then I introduced myself. The children around Cecily at the TP there in that photo, they were watching her. They tried to have a go, but they knew that they couldn't. So, but she had definitely mastered that somersault off the TP. And there was a moment, I must admit, there was a moment where I did do the, is she going to be okay? But it's allowing children that confidence to be able to do that and have those risky moments. And I must admit, there was a little bit of a, are you going to be all right? But she was okay. So, yeah. I feel like I'm not in control of the PowerPoint. We do things like have the tyres, and then those blocks are from a company called Preschool Equipment. If you have a little bit of funding, those blocks are the most amazing things, and you can and the kids will build with them, but you can also deliberately make things that you know, they've got to crawl through. So again, we're deliberately manipulating the environment so children are doing those activities. There is my Alec on the balance beam, and he was really doing that. So I then actually got him to hold something. He was doing it really competently, and I got him to actually hold something, which then changed his, you could see him then being, and it was only a streamer, as you can see, but he was then a bit more mindful that he had something in his hand that he had to then balance with, and just changing those things up. And if it's too complex, changing that skill back so that they're able to achieve it, so that you're able to say that, you know, great job, well done. Let me take a photo of that because I know that Mum's going to love it this afternoon. And then changing the skill up. Yeah. Ding. The other thing we do is, you know, on special days, we're very mindful about how we use motor skills even in special days. And there we go, there's Pirate Day, talk like a pirate day, but you've got to walk the plank before, you know, you come out into the yard. So again, we're looking at that cross-lateral and balance and all of those types of things. Special days always have some sort of motor program or activity going with the special day. Sometimes it's even how you even get into the centre. It might be that you've got to crawl under the streamers. I think there's a photo later on of the hallway being decorated with streamers, and you've got to crawl under them. Parents get another alternative round so they don't have to do it, but manipulating the environment so children actually have to go through that space. Die. There we go, there's the streamers down the hallway. Can you imagine a parent being confronted by that as they walk in there? But we also have all of those activities out all the time. So there's balance rockers, there's, you know, rocker boards. For the infants, there's inclines and hills and slides, and when I landscape with a bit of a slope so that they have undulating surfaces and you know, different things that they have to be on rather than just that flat surface all the time. Oh, if we can get this to play. So now now I start to get a little bit more intentional with, and Diane and Maureen talk about a creep mat. This is my creep mat, and I think that is my Cecily, and we might get it to play. Now I'm being a little bit more intentional with what I'm doing. Not that I'm not intentional with the others. Oh, and it's not going to play either. No. Okay. All right. So what would be there is that I've got some pictures in those little. It's a plastic mat, and I've put some pockets on it. And now we're going to actually verbally say what the picture is as I put my hand on it. So now I'm really starting to have both sides, you know, my physical body as well as both sides of my brain really going. And I can change the pictures, but on that particular day, I knew I had some boys that I would really need to engage. So those pictures are of transport, and there's a train and there's a hot air balloon and there's a boat and there's a motorbike, because I knew that that would have them engaged in doing, and I use that as a transitional activity to go off to spaces or off to the bathroom or wherever we're going next. So yeah. They did it really well. Yoga is a big part of our day, and there's always
sorry, Julie. With that previous one, so they're just literally putting their hands on each picture as they crawl. Correct. And saying the name. Okay.
Correct. That's exactly what they're doing. It's a shame it didn't play because she did it so beautifully. Yoga is a big part of our day, or the thing that I've just learned this year is that in some services we don't call it yoga. So I have offended a parent very greatly in one of the services, and due to their religion, yoga is seen as something that opens the spine and will let the devil in. She was very opposed to her child doing it. And in fact, she had told him that he was never to participate in this activity at kindy, and he was saying to the other children that if they did it, the devil would get into their body. So it was a really confrontational kind of moment where we were thinking, here we're going and we're doing the right thing, and for her, we had offended her. So in that service, we call it movement. He is still not allowed to participate, which from someone who understands movement, I grapple with, but it's about respect for that family and their religion. But movement and yoga is definitely a big part of our day. And yes, so yeah, Naomi's saying she has reservation about yoga due to where it actually originated, something good to be mindful of. And I think it is good to be mindful of where everyone's beliefs lie.
Yeah. In our service, we actually call them vestibular activities and proprioceptive activities. So we've given it the name, and the kids are starting to use those words, not, you know, pronounced perfectly, but that's what they're using.
Yeah. And look, I guess if we were a yoga teacher, this is really just not, you know, like it really for me is they are movement experiences, and probably if I'd have explained that to the mum, but I wasn't going to have the child participate just because I'd called it something else. It was still doing these sorts of activities, and if she didn't want him doing it, so you know, he sits out. It's just another thing that we have to be mindful of in a setting and when we're doing it. But yeah, so those are those big blocks that I was talking about. Maureen talked about children who really found it difficult to sit on carpets, and those little seats, they're a rocker seat, and I have no affiliation with the MTA, but they have them, and they are really great for children on the edge of the mat who just need to rock. There you go. Yeah. I struggle with just calling it something different and just doing it. So I didn't want to say we've just had a question about the yoga and they call it something else. But for that particular family, he's not doing it because I just didn't want to say, oh, well, let's call it something else. But he was still doing those movements. So anyway, I think in moving forward, I mean, definitely from me, if I can suggest doing any PD, it is doing the 2 days with Maureen and Diane and doing the learning connections. And I am by no means paid to say that, because it's just, it really is very life-changing, and it certainly was for me in terms of looking at children holistically and being school ready. I love those big blocks. We're able to do so much more. The seats are really great. And the other thing that I have found over the years is a program called Kiddo. And Kiddo are a university in Perth, and they do a great movement program also. It is $99, but they'll actually work through, and you can actually learn how to pass a ball properly, or how to teach children to catch a ball properly, or those sorts of things. So it's another PD if you're looking for that. And we yeah, okay. And we plan for the outdoors as much as possible, and we pay equal amount of attention to our outdoor program as we do to our indoor program. And I think that's where educators certainly we spend a lot of focus on thinking about our program indoors, and we just maybe open up the doors and just allow children to play, which is fine, but we like to think about that program as much as we do the indoor program. So yeah, and that's how we do it in our services. And I don't think there's another slide. I think that's the last one. Did anyone have, all right, yeah. Did anyone have any questions that Maureen can answer? Arlene says that Kmart sell brilliant multi-sided dice. Please don't send me to Kmart. I love that store. I love that store. Really, I do.
Okay, so the last slide here, Julie says, children naturally begin to gain confidence and improve fine motor skills, improve their speech and language, improve their concentration, and engage with others. So this is what you found in your centres, Julie? Or?
Absolutely, without a doubt, without a doubt, yeah.
You have some centres now that have done some of our work for a number of years, haven't you?
We have. We've been working with Maureen for 6 or 7 years, and so some of my girls did it back when I first met you, and they've been using the program at the services for a long time now. And we will often get, not often, we always get, in certain areas, the school will come back to us and say, when we see that they've come from your early childhood setting, we know that everything's going to be okay. Yeah, which is nice. Which is nice. Yeah. Someone else said, did I make the creep mat? Absolutely, I made the creep mat. It's just a piece of plastic from Spotlight, and I just cut the pockets, and it's literally just electrical tape that have you spoken to the minister about the importance of movement in the that's from Angela. Right. And from what perspective, Angela? But I'll speak to the minister.
I think she might mean in promoting physical activities that, you know, lots of kids get to prep in that early years, and then they have to sit in the classroom the whole time.
Yeah, yeah. Maureen, got any thoughts?
Yeah, I think, you know, there are many children who are entering school. We know the early childhood teachers, we know that, not early childhood teachers, we know that Australian Early Development Census shows in Queensland around a third of children that on the last census are entering school with one or more developmental lacks, so, which is really scary. So we know that there's a lot of children who go into school to prep without the skills they need to initially succeed. Now they may get them, but if for example there's a number of them, if they've got a number of differences in their development, if they've got, you know, 2 or more significant delays, we know that it's going to be so much harder for those children. And we know also that the government list of skills and ages that children should acquire skills is actually being dumbed down. We know that they've even actually taken out some of the ball things on on this list that shows that children are ready. So I think that our expectations of what children can do has actually slowly slipped as well. And something came up when I saw Julie doing those children doing some great work. And what I think people in the early childhood setting fail to understand is that, okay, a child should be hopping at 3. A child should be hopping at 3. And okay, so they can hop. And then eventually they'll learn to skip. They'll learn to balance, etc. What we've got to do when they acquire a skill like that, we don't go, oh, isn't that wonderful? They can do that now. We've got to see, can they do it under other circumstances? For example, can they stand on one leg? Fine. Can they stand on one leg with their eyes closed? So what we need to do is we need to challenge them to do an acquired skill in a slightly different way. For example, if they can heel toe forwards, can they heel toe backwards? Can they heel toe forwards with their eyes closed? Because this is what I think that we fail to do, is to challenge that child to take that extra step. We go, hallelujah, job done. This children can do this. So we can tick that box. And the actual neurological effect comes from challenging that skill to be done under slightly different conditions. That's where the real difference is going to happen in the child's brain. That's when those neurons are really going to fire. That's when the myelin, that fatty sheath that Karen talked about this morning, gets bigger, so the message is going faster. That's what's going to happen when we really can do things with smart and sure about our body and can do it under numerous circumstances, not just tick a box, because we've all got to keep all this data, and it gets pretty tedious collecting data, doesn't it? You've got to tick this box and that box. So we often don't have time to look more broadly. But those of you in early education, when children are out in playing and free play, that's when you can be really quite prescriptive with individual kids. Oh, aren't you, Johnny, isn't that fantastic? You can do that. That's wonderful. Let's see if we can do it, sideways. Can you do that sideways? Can you do it, as I said, with your eyes closed? I mean, you're not going to do anything dangerous in that respect with eyes closed, but I think that we often don't extend the children to the extent that we should.
Yeah, that is so, you're so right, Maureen. We often look at school readiness, which is that great push down on us, as being able to know our colours and our numbers too, and being able to write our name. But if you don't know where your body is in time and space, that's a by the by. And, I spend my life trying to convince educators or educate educators and parents about those things will come. There are some fundamentals that we need first. So I can go to school and I can be able to recite the alphabet, but I'm still hitting my friend over the head to get what I need. That we need to look at children holistically. And so it's not just about being able to know those things or be able to count to 100, because it's certainly not. And gee, it's a fight. It's a daily fight. For some, they're just so focused on, and parents will, often that's their focus. And I think one of the problems is that very initial meeting, and this is my experience over the years, and I hope there's no school principals listening, that first initial school meeting, your interview, and the first thing the child is asked to do is do what? Know their colours, do their alphabet, and write their name. So families come back and they come back to us, and then they're saying, well, at the school interview, the principal asked for those things, so they must be important. And now I've got 6 weeks and you need to teach them, that. And so it's that wrestle with what parents and as a community we perceive as being school ready, with what we know that, your child's still spinning around on the back of a mat or falling off the chair. That is about, educating educators and it's about educating parents. And I think in terms of, you know, for me, I guess there's a sense of teaching community about what it is to be school ready. Yes, our EC has an obstacle course every day. And that's just, you know, wonderful to hear. That's good.
And one of the things also that I'm very mindful of, and was alluded to through one of the presentations today, which shows we know that there's children, there's 80% more uptake in early childhood programs in the last 20 years. So we know that, you know, there's a larger number of our children are actually in some form of care from a very young age. And my concern is particularly more for the younger ones, where they travel the same route to the same place 5 days a week to the same sort of room that they're in. And so that's the way it is, because as Julie said, you have so much space per child. So often there's not the great outdoor spaces. So I think that what we have to be very mindful of is to ensure that those same environments do have something significant that changes at least every week. So those children who travel the same routes on the same road, etc., everything's the same. Whereas if they were perhaps home with mum, she might take them to the shops, they might watch the man collect the rubbish, or something might have happened in the street, so when they go to a more formal environment, they don't have those sort of differences in their world. And so I think that one of the things that I've noticed over the years going into early childhood settings, that I think that those children who often have been in some form of care from the 6 weeks need to certainly have some significant thing in their room. For example, particularly those babies, say kids from say 10 months on to 2, they need something to really activate their interest to explore in that period. So something needs to change. You don't want to be taking them to the same room with the same stuff every day. You've got to move the furniture around. You've got to, you know, provide different forms of stimuli for those children to try to explore. At least weekly, something needs to change in, I think, some of those environments.
So, sorry everyone, just 3 minutes left, and I'm just posting the cheese and wine link there, so if you wanted to join that, and there's some prizes happening. But yes, we can still keep going.
I'm happy to do cheese and wine. Always.
Any questions from anybody? Everybody's mute. Well, thank you for attending. I hope everyone has gained something from this presentation, and thanks for your attention. Thank you, Julie.
Thanks, Maureen.
Thank you very much, you guys.
Christine, thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for presenting, and thank you for expanding our ideas of what we could do. I do look forward to being able to pull out my sensory tunnel that the kids crawl through after the COVID, because that is just one that unfortunately we had to put away for now. But I have to admit, we've had some balloons hanging from the roof as of inside physical play, and that has been lots of jumping inside. That they can't, you know, we jump outside as well. But yes, but thank you very much. Lots of new ideas. Thank you everyone else.